What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Everything School podcast. I'm joined always by my co-host Billy Derrick. Billy, how are we doing so far today?
I'm good, Chase. It's we're getting into the thick of football season and we're starting to feel it, but we're also in the spot where, you know, a lot of us can't wait any longer. Media days has passed us by. Fall camp is getting to the point where I don't want to say boring, but you've gotten through a lot of the initial updates and okay, here's who's hurt, here's who's not, here's who's looking good. And after, a couple weeks, I'm sure a lot of the players, and maybe some of the coaches are just in that mindset of, all right, let's play. We're ready to roll. So I know the fans are. They've been in that mindset for a while, but it's almost here, man. It's almost here.
It is right around the corner. Every sleep that we take gets us closer, and every morning we wake up gets us closer to college game day on Saturday mornings. We are the 26th is considered the first weekend of football, so we are math like what uh almost 2.5 weeks out, basically. So
Yep.
we're getting
Yep.
closer and
About
closer.
2.5 weeks.
Never was great at math, but yeah, 2.5 weeks. It's almost here. We're getting so excited with a lot to talk about in the college football world because right before the season starts, why not have the most chaos of the entire offseason? Conference realignment is here. People have been fearing it. People have been wanting it. It is everything that half the people hate and half the people love. We have a lot of teams jumping ship. The Pac-12, we just watched a conference die over the last, I would say, week and a half, which is wild to me. So let's get started. Oregon and Washington will be joining UCLA and USC in the new Big Ten Conference. UCLA and USC left this past season. So the Big Ten has now expanded to 18 teams. And then Arizona, Arizona State, Utah, and Colorado have also jumped ship to go to the new Big 12 conference that will match the SEC probably in the next couple of seasons with 16 each. So mega conferences are happening. It's moving quicker than I think a lot of people assumed. So, Billy, what's your take on all of this chaos that has kind of engulfed the entire talk around college football?
Yeah, I mean, to be perfectly honest, I don't like it, especially the timing of it. We're almost 3 weeks away from week zero of the college football season. And instead of talking about, fall camp updates, coaches' comments, you know, funny player quotes, most people around the country are talking about, realignment. And, I think it's a necessary evil, in order for college football to advance. But I mean, I don't think there are many fans, especially in the Southeast. Like if you're an SEC fan, I don't know that you're outraged over it, but you're also, I don't think you're very happy. But then again, it all started with Greg Sankey and the move to add Texas and OU, right? I've heard a few comments from people trying to tell me that no, it was the Big Ten adding USC and UCLA, and that's not what happened. It all started with Texas and OU coming to the SEC. And I didn't hate that move, but I also wasn't. I didn't fall in love with it. I mean, I think the SEC was fine with 14 teams. Now Texas and OU add a lot to the conference. They'll add even more money to the conference, like they need more. But it happened, and the Big Ten sat there as the second biggest conference in terms of revenue, right behind the SEC, and said, "Hey, we don't want to sit here and play second fiddle. We want to compete with the SEC, and we want to be that other mega conference, like you said." And that's what they're doing. Credit to them. I don't like I don't like how they've done it. Like I don't know that they really needed to add Oregon and Washington as soon as they did. I mean, you added USC and UCLA, and you're at 16 teams. And so, you're even with the SEC, maybe not revenue wise quite yet. I don't know that they'll ever be. and maybe not pure talent wise in recruiting, but also I don't know that they'll ever be. No one's ever going to match the SEC in recruiting rankings, talent acquisition. I think the Big Ten closed the gap a little bit, but for the Big Ten to add Oregon and Washington, I'm sure they felt like they had to do it. But now they're at an 18 team conference, and you've got the death of the Pac-12, which I think we all knew was inevitable. I mean that was coming. They had already lost USC and UCLA, and at that point, the Pac-12 was they were just sort of laying by the side of the road, waiting to be killed by another conference, and that happened to be the Big Ten, and then the Big 12 ended up taking Utah, Arizona State, which I thought was great for the Big 12. I think the Big 12 is a conference that some people are sleeping on, and I've talked about this the last week or so after all this has happened. They've got the best basketball conference. I mean, they had it last year, and I think they added even better teams with Arizona. Arizona State's got a decent program as well. In Utah, I mean, Utah's a perennial top 10 team, great program under Kyle Whittingham. And so if you're the Big Ten, I think you can be comfortable and confident in your spot as the third tier conference, right behind the SEC and the Big Ten. Now, I think the gap between the SEC and the Big Ten is still, is still pretty wide. But if you're the Big 12, you're in a good spot, and then you go to the ACC, and they're locked into that 34-year TV deal, which was ridiculously too long to begin with. I know it's not 34 years, but I mean, I didn't think that was really necessary. I think it was like 11 or 12 years or something like that. So they're trying to get out of that grant of rights deal, specifically Florida State, Miami, North Carolina, and Clemson as well, right? So where do those teams go? Right? Do they end up in the Big Ten? Do they end up in the SEC? I think the SEC is the most likely landing spot, and I'm sure we'll get into this. But for the ACC, I think they're close. They're close to dying too, Chase. I don't think it's going to come in anytime soon. But within the next 5 years, I don't think there will be much of an ACC left, right? Because Florida State obviously wants out. I think Clemson will follow Florida State to whatever conference they go to. And then you've also got traditional powers like a Miami, North Carolina, who has a good program. What do Virginia and Virginia Tech do? But also, what do the academic schools like Wake Forest and Duke do? Right? I mean, they're in a little bit of trouble right now. I think they know that. So, like we talked about before, I think we've talked about this in past episodes. This was going to happen, right? We all knew the two power conferences were going to be the SEC and the Big Ten. But I think the reality is hitting people harder than they expected, right? It's like, man, the Pac-12 is dying. This is happening, I think, quicker than people expected. I wish it would have happened right after the season, after the national title. We're in the off season, gives us something to talk about, but it's kind of distracting us from a lot of the fun and cool fall camp stuff that comes out. So the good thing though is that the SEC isn't really involved. They've got their 16 teams starting next season, and they'll go from there. But yeah, Chase, I'm in the mindset that, man, it's hitting us right now, and I don't like it, but we're going to have to deal with it. And I think the players are the ones that are hurting here, right? I mean, there's a lot of high school athletes that are being hurt by this, especially with the portal. There's volleyball players, softball players that are going to have to travel to Los Angeles from Rutgers now. I mean, that's unnecessary, right? So I think there's some necessary evils that had to happen, and there's going to be some people paying the price, but there's also going to be some people that are reaping the benefits, and that's kind of the world of college athletics right now.
Yeah, it is for sure engulfed the entire college sports world.
Mm-hmm.
To timeline it a little bit, this all started with Colorado jumping ship, just a couple days before everything
Yep.
kind of unraveled. And you made a good point. The ACC seems to be next, and I think when you mentioned the two best conferences, the SEC is one, the Big Ten is two, and then to me, really, it was between the ACC and the Big 12 for survival, if you would call it that. And the Big 12, they they stamped their survival in stone. by adding all the teams. If they had lost teams to, say the Big Ten or the SEC like they have with Oklahoma and Texas, then you can argue that they could be the next down the pipeline. But by securing these new teams from the Pac-12, kind of cements them, like you said, as the third conference uh, among the Power Five. The Pac-12, their new strategy now is to merge with the Mountain West, possibly. I don't know how well that'll work. It'll obviously be the bottom of the Power Five in terms of conferences. I know Stanford has talked about going independent, which they're like Notre Dame, the way they have their TV deals and stuff and their money set up. So they, out of the four remaining teams, would be the most likely to go independent. I know the ACC has reached out to California, maybe Washington State. So I can see them trying to secure some teams that are kind of being left to be picked off. But I don't know. I don't know if I have really. I don't know if I can. I don't think I like this, but I don't think I dislike it. Because you look at the Big 12, you said basketball, that's the best basketball conference. That conference in football in a couple years is going to be so incredibly fun because as of right now, there is no top dog. There's no Bama, there's no Ohio State, there's no Clemson. That conference is so wide open, and there's not, to me, there's not there's the top half is not separated by much in that conference, and we're going to get some
No,
great football. We're going to get we're going to get some matchups that we haven't seen before. And that's what I'm excited about. I love matchups sometimes, and I love, you know, we get USC, Ohio State. That's going to be interesting. But then you look down in the Big 12, Utah, BYU, Arizona. We're going to get some fun matchups in that conference.
yeah, there's no doubt. And, I know I talked about basketball with the Big 12, but like you said, you think about the TV revenue that's going to come from some of those games, some of those 60 to 50 games in the Big 12. I mean, that's what they've been living off of, but they're going to get even more of it. With the style of play that Utah likes to play with. Um, but Brett McMurphy put something out earlier today. He tweeted out. He said Notre Dame is pushing the ACC to add Stanford and Cal, while SMU would join with no revenue the first 5 to 7 years in the ACC. And a source said Notre Dame continues to push, yet won't join as a full time member. That makes no sense to us. So, Notre Dame, Chase, is an interesting player in this because they're just kind of sitting along. I mean, obviously they're bringing in the NBC TV money every year, and that's just as much as many other big time schools and big time Power Five conferences. So Notre Dame's an interesting player. If they join the ACC, right, which I mean I don't think they will, and obviously they don't want to, but if they were to, I think that would cement the ACC as a conference that isn't going to die, right? But I think Notre Dame sees that, and they don't want to fully join, but they still want to they want to maintain that sort of halfway deal where they play 4 to 5 ACC schools. They're basically in it for basketball. They don't want to join a conference for football, which I mean, I know it doesn't make sense to a lot of people, but I don't. I mean, why would they want to join the ACC right now, right? I mean, I think the Big Ten would be the conference for Notre Dame to join, and I've said that for a while. I think the Big Ten should be the conference Notre Dame should look at instead of the ACC. But yeah, the ACC, they're not going to stop fighting. Obviously, they're going to. I think they're going to try to add Stanford and Cal. Does that help them though? I mean, I don't think so. So there's a lot of pieces to this that I think some people forget about, and it's not going to stop, right? Like this is not really going to slow down. The more dominoes that fall, the more the more money that these conferences bring in, and yeah, it's gonna come down to two big conferences, but how, right? What teams are going to leave the ACC? Does the ACC try to step up and add some teams that people don't expect? But will that be enough for them to maintain their status? Who knows? But yeah, I mean, back to your Big 12 comment, Chase. I've kept saying this: the Big 12 is a sleeper conference because I know OU and Texas are leaving, but the Utah BYU rivalry is huge. Utah, you could argue, might be the best team in that conference after OU and Texas leave. Um, I know Arizona and Arizona State are down, but of course you still got Oklahoma State, you still got Baylor, Texas Tech, West Virginia. So you still got some fun football, but I don't know that you'll get many playoff contenders. So I think they're sitting pretty in that third spot in terms of conferences. But what's their ceiling? I think that's something we'll have to figure out.
They also sent a team to the national championship last year, although it was, a championship game that we forget
Yeah, TCU. Yeah,
because of how absurd that game was score wise. But it's going to be a fun conference, and I said this the other day. The winner of that conference is going to be a fun team. No matter
hmm
who it is, it's going to be a fun team, and they're going to have a fun path to get there. Uh, I don't know where these four teams go. I think to me right now that's the biggest story that to me at least is where do these four teams go? Is the Pac-12 are they going to merge with the Mountain West? Do they have any more, tricks up their sleeve? I don't think they really have much, of a choice. I think it's either merge or go under. And I think at this point, like you said, the ACC adding Cal and Stanford, that's not really saying a whole lot. I mean, Stanford has been great in the past, but as of late, they've been, the bottom half of the Pac-12. Cal the same as well. So, I mean, you're not adding any home run hitters, which I think a lot of these conferences are trying to do. So I don't see a way out really for the Pac-12 at this point. I think it's just time to wave the
yeah,
white.
yeah. And I've heard from a lot of people, a lot of analysts, and they'll be asked about the Pac-12. What do you think about the future of the Pac-12? And they'll say, well, the Pac-12 is going to ask the Mountain West to merge with them. They're like, no, 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 no. The Mountain West is going to ask the Pac-12 to merge with them, right? Because I mean, that's not the Pac-12 anymore, right? I know they're going to be called the Pac-12, but that's Stanford, Cal, Oregon State, and Washington State with however many Mountain West teams. So, I mean, you could very well call that the Mountain West as opposed to calling it the Pac-12, and they've got four teams, right? After next season, they're going to have four teams in that conference. So they're having discussions right now about what the hell to do, right? And so, but I just love how people talk about, oh, the Pac-12, they're going to ask for permission, um, from the Mountain West. No, the Mountain West is going to the Pac-12 and asking them, right? Like that's the other way around there. So I think that's funny to look at. But yeah, I know Greg Sankey came out, I think earlier today. He was on the Paul Feinbaum show, or maybe it was yesterday, and he said, "Yeah, I'm empathetic, for the Pac-12. I disagree with that. I don't think he really. I don't think many people really feel bad for the Pac-12. I mean, right? If you're good natured, you have a good heart, you probably do. But I mean, that's the way college athletics is moving. But Greg Sankey also said that he doesn't, as the SEC stands, they don't need four different time zones to to show their dominance, which I thought was a very cocky, arrogant way of saying we're the SEC, right? We're good enough to be in the Southeastern Conference
It's
in the
such a good
Central Time
quote.
Zone, right? It really is.
It's a great
It,
quote.
it was it was such a Greg Sankey quote, but I mean he's right. Like the SEC will always be the most dominant conference. Now maybe the Big Ten gets close, but I don't think they ever overtake the SEC. I think that's what they want, right? They desperately want that, even though they'll never get there. So I thought those Greg Sankey comments were interesting. But at the end of the day, Chase, for the Pac-12, they're dead. They're 6 feet under, and they're going to need the Mountain West, right? I mean, imagine that. 5 years ago, would you ever thought the Pac-12 would be would be contacting the Mountain West for help, saying, "Hey, can you basically try to save our conference to salvage this?" I mean, that would be on par with a Group of Five conference at that point. So I do feel though for some of the athletes at Washington State, Oregon State, that they have their rivalry games with Oregon and Washington now. I mean, I know Oregon's AD said, yeah, we still want to play that, and so did Washington's AD. But how hard will that be? I mean, that's another game. They'll have to add to the schedule. So, and that'll be a non-conference game at this point. So there's some rivalries and traditions that are being lost and broken. I think that's a part that some fans don't enjoy, and I do feel for those fans. But like I said, at the end of the day, this is where it's moving, and you just got to kind of roll with it.
I think to me the biggest dislike is like the Big Ten 18 teams. How are you going to work that in a conference schedule? I know they have their ways of doing it, but at this point, I heard someone had say a great quote today. Why there's no point in playing out of conference because you basically are playing out of conference, half of your season. The Big Ten is going to play the Pac-12, which is, merged it with them now basically. But that would be their out of conference. So that's what I'm most interested to see is what the conference schedule begins to look like and how they are going to determine games and stuff out of conference as well. I think everyone loves a good um, Oregon State game. Oregon State's not been the best as of late, but it's a fun atmosphere. It's a fun game. The Apple Cup with Washington and Washington State as well. Who give me some of your predictions with how the SEC unravels, if you could just, take five teams and just, give an idea of where you think they'll end up, like a Clemson or a Florida State. I mean, even Louisville. Louisville's, they're poised to have a great season this year.
Yeah. Well, there's some in-state rivalries that the SEC could add, right? Florida State, Florida, um, Clemson, South Carolina, Louisville, Kentucky. I don't think they would add Georgia Tech, but you've got Georgia Tech, Georgia. Um, and if you add Virginia, Virginia Tech, both of those, you've got another in-state rivalry. But to answer your question, I think Florida State and Clemson will eventually be in the SEC within the next 2, maybe 3 years. I mean, it's bound to happen. I don't think the SEC would let the Big Ten snatch those two teams because then at that point it gets real with okay, now the Big Ten would would be the conference. I mean, it would be absurd if they had Clemson and Florida State. I think it's natural to assume Florida State and Clemson bolt to the SEC, right? So at that point, you've got 18 teams. I don't think they would stop at just those two. And then so where do you go next? Do you add another team from Florida with Miami? I mean that's an option, of course. I think North Carolina. I think the SEC likes the idea of North Carolina. I think they really do. I don't know that NC State is a team they would add. I think Virginia Tech is a team they would think about adding. So I would say, if you ask me for five teams, I would say Florida State, Clemson, North Carolina, Virginia Tech, and then at that point, most likely Virginia. Um, just have that Virginia Tech State rivalry. Um, but at the end of the day, it might just be four, right? It could just be Florida State, Clemson, and then North Carolina and Virginia Tech. I think those four fan bases would fit in well. Virginia Tech with a lot of tradition, North Carolina with basketball, obviously a great basketball school, solid football program. And then we know what Florida State and Clemson are. Those are two top 10 teams, I think, heading into this season. So, easy answer is four teams. Those four teams I just named. It's hard to pick a fifth team. Like I said, I don't think they would add Georgia Tech. My gut tells me Virginia. I don't think they would add Pittsburgh.
Maybe
And
Wake,
then kind
but
of, yeah, maybe
maybe
Wake.
not.
Yeah, I think Vanderbilt fills that void of an academic school. But
NC
I mean,
State.
Miami, yeah, maybe NC State. Miami is a school that I don't think they're going to want to be left in the ACC. So maybe Miami just sort of pays their way into the SEC. Maybe outbids Virginia or something like that. So yeah, I think the easy answer is just to say four schools. But if I had to pick a fifth, I would probably say throw Virginia in there with Virginia Tech. I don't really see a benefit of adding Virginia. I really don't. I mean, their football program's awful. Of course, they had that awful tragedy. Um, basketball program's really good, baseball program's really good. So they fit in those two sports, but that'd be like kind of adding another Vanderbilt sort of, So I think they're looking for big time fan bases, big time, revenue producers. And so Florida State, Clemson would be the first two, and then North Carolina, Virginia Tech, I think would be the next two. And that's probably where I think they would stop. But I think it's going to take a while for the SEC to add even two more teams, right? Much less four more teams. But I do think within the next 2 3 years they'll add two more teams. I think those two teams will be Florida State and Clemson. But that's a good question though. I mean, who will the SEC add? Maybe the Big Ten makes a huge, massive bid to Florida State, and Florida State says, "Hey, this is more money. We're going to go there." And then what does the SEC do? Do they counter? Do they try to make some sort of package with Clemson and Florida State? Who knows? But that's a good question, Jason. I mean, that's something Greg Sankey is thinking about right now.
When we talk about Big 12 being, the best basketball conference, imagine they go out and they somehow secure Miami into that basketball conference. That I mean,
Yeah.
that just makes that basketball conference probably the deepest, and it's not close at that point.
Hmm.
But
Yeah. I think Miami is a school the Big 12 could certainly look at. Yeah.
that's the Big 12 to me. The SEC and the Big Ten, they've kind of they've kind of laid down their path. The Big 12 is kind of that team. They've added, like I said earlier. I'm interested to see who they add if they want to keep expanding and
Yeah.
where they can kind of make deals and bring teams in. I think, like we've been saying, the Big 12, they're a fun conference just because they're not one, they're not two, but they're certainly not four and five at the moment. So,
Yeah.
it'll be interesting to see what they do. Notre Dame also is the ball is in their court with everything right now. The way their TV deal is set, you know, the way their football team operates business wise, they can go anywhere.
Yep.
And it's, that's the bidding war that I think will these two, three conferences will end up having is who can secure Notre Dame at the end of the day, who can secure Clemson and Florida State. But I think as good as Clemson and Florida State are, Notre Dame brings in just an exponential amount of money in any sport
Yeah.
they run.
This might be a crazy concept, but is Notre Dame a school the SEC eventually looks at? You know, I mean,
They've got to
if
be.
it feels crazy, but it also kind of feels right. Like, okay, another huge brand, not even just a national brand, but a global brand, and you bring a different type of fan base. You could probably bring in NBC, to the SEC of some sort. So I think that would be one of my hot takes. Notre Dame joins the SEC in the next 5 years. I think that's a program that Greg Sankey would think about. I really do. Does it happen? Who knows? Is is it a pipe dream? Does Notre Dame? I mean, have they just decided they'll never join a conference? Maybe, but at the end of the day, that's a school I could definitely see Greg Sankey wanting to add. Is it possible? Is it feasible? Does Notre Dame even want to? There's questions to be asked. But there's so many different directions this could still go. I don't think the ACC is dead yet. And I don't think, I mean, the Big 12 isn't even close to being dead, right? They're living well. But the ACC has some work to do and some huge decisions to make here in the next couple of years.
If the ACC can keep their top dogs happy, and then somehow bring in Notre Dame, that would be the biggest shock, I think, to a lot of people because I think a lot of people have that mindset. It's like, these top dogs want to jump and they're ready to jump ship as soon as humanly possible. But you bring in you keep everybody together and you bring in Notre Dame from the ACC standpoint. I mean, that's hard to break up at that point. But,
Yeah.
with the playoffs are expanding after this year as well. So the need, I mean, we're gonna get five conference champions, which four now. I don't. Do we even? that is also another topic of discussion. If the Pac-12 and Mountain West merge, do we just go to a Power Four? Is that the new five in the Power Five? I mean, what that's another question that we can get into as well at some point. But yeah, the playoffs are expanding, conferences are expanding. This is it's a changing time, but I don't think I hate it, and I don't know if I like it. If that makes any sense to anybody. I'm on the fence. I think once we get to where everything is put together and we're playing games, we have a schedule, everything is calmed down a little bit, then I think I can give my opinion on it. Right now, I think I might be indifferent about it. But there's so many. I mean, we're creating storylines. That's what we're doing. We're creating mega conferences. It's a money driven thing now. It's money, money, money. Everybody is chasing the top dollar, but you know, maybe it leads to better sports. Maybe it kills it all together. But let's hope though they didn't set the world on fire by doing this. But I'm excited. I think anything for college football is good. So it's still going to be college football at the end of the day. So
Yeah, college football is a weird but awesome sport, and that's why we love it, man.
pro sports eat your heart out. You can't even think about coming up with this much drama if you tried.
Yeah,
So, but
yeah.
we're gonna take a short break. We're gonna come back. We're gonna talk about some fall camps from both of our teams, and we're almost there. We're 2.5 weeks away. I can smell it. I can almost smell the field. I can smell the fireworks, and it's a great time. So we'll be back in just a second. Welcome back. I hope you guys enjoyed that first segment. We got to talk a lot about realignment and where the future of college conferences are headed. Now we're going to transition a little bit into some fall camp talk. Like Billy said, we this is getting overshadowed a lot by conference realignment chaos. So we are here to bring you what is being overshadowed. Like we don't chase headlines sometimes. We were really are about bringing the people what they want, and this is what they want. Billy, how's Vanderbilt looking in fall camp?
Good, man. It's talking season's over, and it's time to watch some people actually knock some heads and complete some passes and talk to coaches and players. So it's been good to be out there. It's my first fall camp, really. I mean, I went to a few last year, but this has been my first fall camp to really be close to the action and be able to talk to coaches and players. Um, number one, I just think the growth of the culture. And I know that's people say that word culture a lot, but I think Clark Lee and Barton Simmons and his entire coaching staff have just done a great job of organizing a depth chart that has that word depth in it. Right, there's depth, on the defensive line. There's depth at receiver. They've got a good quarterback room. I think they like their linebacker room. So there's still positions of weakness. I think the tight end is a position of weakness. I think running back is a position of weakness. I think the secondary, specifically the corners, are another position of weakness. But I just think when you look at Vanderbilt and where they were 2 years ago, for them to be in this spot, a team that, I mean, let's face it, a lot of people, expect Vanderbilt to be in a bowl game or at least close to it, right? I mean, that would be a disappointing season if Vanderbilt doesn't make a bowl game this year. Um, and then you go to recruiting. They signed the second highest rated recruiting classes in school history. They had the best 1 year turnaround at Vanderbilt since 2011 when James Franklin got there, and they're closing the margin. Right, they're starting to close the margins against that. That sort of second, maybe third tier of the SEC, like Missouri, South Carolina, Kentucky. They lost by a combined 14 points to Missouri and South Carolina last year. But they also lost to Georgia, Alabama, and Tennessee by a combined score of 166. So, they've closed the gaps with teams like South Carolina, Missouri, Kentucky, but they've still got work to do if they want to compete with the big boys like a Tennessee, a Georgia, and Alabama and LSU. So I think that's where they're looking to improve. They're looking to be able to dominate in the trenches. And I think they're getting there. So I think Vanderbilt fans have to realistically look at those expectations and say, okay, yeah, the hope and the expectation is a bowl game this year, but the margin is still small. Like the margin for error is it's not as small as it was last year, but it's still pretty small, right? I mean, Clarkley said it at SEC Media Days. He said if whether Vanderbilt gets to a bowl game or not is going to come down to a handful of plays against those teams like Florida, Auburn, Kentucky, Missouri, right? I mean, Wake Forest, you can throw them in there. So I mean, the margin is still small, but I mean, there's really not a ton to take out of fall camp. I mean, I've never been somebody that overreacts to fall camp things that happen, injuries, players that stand out. But I do think the 2023 recruiting class is a very good class, and you're seeing a lot of those freshmen this season step up and show what they're capable of. I mean, they've got a couple of corners that are pretty good. A sophomore, Trudell Berry, freshman, and Martell Height that have looked really good. I like their running backs. They got a couple of freshman running backs out of that class. And their quarterback in AJ Swan has looked really good. He went 13 for 13 in the scrimmage last Saturday at Unsworth, and they've got another or Sunday, and then they've got another scrimmage on Sunday at home. But in terms of how they've looked, I think they've looked good. I mean, they've stayed relatively healthy, other than most of their defense is out. I think a lot of those are soft tissue injuries, precautionary and measures taken by the coaching staff because they'd rather sit guys out during fall camp and have them ready to go, for the season, as opposed to, you know, getting a couple of reps and working with the ones. Like that doesn't matter as much right now. As long as they can have those guys ready for game week heading into Hawaii, I think they'll be fine. Will Shepherd is a guy that has looked ridiculous. I mean, he's made unbelievable catches during fall camp. I think he's one of the better receivers in the SEC and maybe in the country. He was on the Biletnikoff Award watch list, so obviously he's a guy to keep an eye on. And defensive coordinator is going to have fits with him all year. But I would say if I have one takeaway, Chase, from fall camp so far, it's the depth at receiver. They've got Will Shepherd, a guy that's one of the best in the conference, but they also like what they've got behind him. Quincy Skinner, a guy that's a junior. He's been in the program, his experience. He showed flashes last year. In the slot, you've got one of the faster guys on the team, Jade McGowan, who also showed flashes last year. He's gotten bigger. He's improved. He talked about ball security today in his interview. But they picked up a couple of freshmen from the Nashville area, Junior Sherrill from Lipscomb Academy and London Humphreys from CPA. Both those two guys have really, really impressed me at the receiver position. And I mean, they came in and are ready to compete and ready to make plays. London made a play in the scrimmage that was a 73-yard bolt to the end zone, and just like that, I mean, they finally got some impact freshmen that I think are gonna play this season, and they love their depth at receiver, and they also love their depth at linebacker. So they've got some good depth at two pretty important positions. But I guess a negative of fall camp has been the cornerback play. I mean, not quarterback, not signal caller, but cornerback, defensive backs. I mean, and Tennessee has, I think, some of the same problems. I'm sure you'll talk some about that with Tennessee in their fall camp, but it's just hard. It's hard to find good corners, man. I mean, it just is. It's a tough position. Usually, Alabama, Georgia, LSU, Ohio State, Michigan, the big time programs snatch up a lot of the good corners and a lot of those good athletes on the edge. That's where college football is won and lost now. It's not in the trenches anymore. These games are won and lost on the boundaries, right? If you can get it out in space and beat guys with speed, you're going to win, right? You're going to win games, especially if you can take the top off the defense as well. Vanderbilt is going to be able to do that on the offensive end, but can they stop teams from doing that on the defensive end? That's the question. They moved one of their receivers to corner because they're looking for options at that corner spot right now. So a positive, the receiving core led by Will Shepherd, but a negative is the defensive backs. I think they're really, really thin at defensive back. They lost a guy to the transfer portal to Miami. So, yeah, as a whole, Chase, they've looked good. I think they've stayed relatively healthy. They got to get a little bit healthier on defense. And then the corners, those guys have to improve, or else they're not going to be much better than they were last year at that position. But as a whole, I think this team is better. I think the culture has grown. I think Clark Lee is building this program the right way. I think many people would agree with me on that. Um, but at the end of the day, I mean, they could go 6-6, make a bowl, and have a really good season. But they could also go 5-7, still have a really good season, but not make their end goal of a bowl game. So that, I mean, the margins are just small. They're small for Vanderbilt. I think they always will be. Um, but at the end of the day, that's where Vanderbilt will typically be in the SEC. Small margins for error, and they've got to take advantage of the opportunities when they get them. But yeah, fall camp's been good. Like I said, the second scrimmage is this Sunday. That will be on Vanderbilt's home turf in their home stadium at First Bank Stadium. So they're going to get a chance to have kind of a dry run at their stadium before the Hawaii game at home. So yeah, it'll be interesting. I'll be looking for some of those younger guys to keep making plays, see if the defensive backs have improved at all, and see who else gets healthy on the defensive side of the ball. But yeah, I mean, it's you're starting to see a little bit more in terms of action, young guys stepping up, and like I said, they've got another scrimmage, so that'll be another big note taking day, to see who else stands out. But yeah, as a whole, it's been good.
Billy mentioned that he's been getting to go to fall camp some this year. Billy is a great follow for any Vanderbilt fan or Tennessee fan wanting to get into Vanderbilt. Billy's Twitter has been fantastic lately. It always is, but as of late, great fall camp coverage, good interviews. So you guys find Billy on Twitter and click the follow button because you will not be disappointed with the information that's coming out of that Twitter account. Swapping gears, Tennessee. I, this is I don't think this is unfair to say. This is Tennessee's biggest fall camp in terms of hype surrounding the program, probably since 90, probably 99 after the year they won the national championship. There's
Yep.
a lot going on in Knoxville. Tennessee coming off of an 11-2 season, great season, best most wins in a season since we were both still in diapers. So there's a lot to be proud of coming off of a season where you beat Clemson, where you beat Alabama, and where you beat LSU. Uh, but where they lose a lot. Hendon Hooker is gone. Uh, Jalen Hyatt, Cedric Tillman, that production on the offensive side of the ball is gone. I think for me, the first few weeks of fall, the offense is the offense. Joe, uh, I think you're not really going to get to tell what Joe is going to be until he steps out against Virginia in Nashville, by the way. Uh, we've seen a little bit from him these last couple seasons. I thought we were talking the other day about Joe and Billy. Correct me if I'm wrong here. It's weird for a quarterback to come into a program and get beat out for a starting job, but then come back with way more hype than he had way before even stepping on the field for the very first time. I feel like it's a little weird, but we're getting that with Joe. I know the arm strength is there. A lot of people, I agree. I think he's the best arm strength wise, probably in the country. But to me, the accuracy issues have been there the last couple of seasons. He's looked pretty solid in fall practice so far, but they're playing against air, so you expect him to look good against air. Receivers, deep at receiver this year, transfers like Dante Thornton coming over from Oregon, where McCoy is coming back, true sophomore Squirrel White, who I am most excited to see this year just because of how electrifying he is. You want to talk, when NFL wise, you have Mahomes and you had Tyreek Hill, I should say. Now, Milton and Squirrel White kind of have that same dynamic of just a guy you can just say go deep and hit 80 yards down the field. Brew and Squirrel dealing with some injuries, lingering hamstring injuries for both of the guys. Tomorrow is actually their first scrimmage. So those two have been limited in practice, but they are reported to be playing tomorrow, which will be good. Get them in, start getting them in season form. I know today they were in shells. I think yesterday was first full day of full pads. Hype was given some great quotes about people buying in, and I think that's you talked about culture when speaking about Clark Lee. That to me, the fall camp has honestly been more about continuing to build the culture at the University of Tennessee. I know a lot of guys, you watch a lot of the interviews from players coming out now, these guys have completely bought into Josh Heupel. There are some guys last year you can look at them and think, well, they're not all the way in. This team is I've never seen a Tennessee team so bought in to a program as this current team has with Heupel in them. I think Heupel has been great. I think his offense and all of his recruiting has been fantastic. I think he's going to keep building on that. But yeah, the offense is what the offense is going to be. In fall camp, it's good for the guys to get in season form. The running backs are going to be, they're basically the same as last year. Jabari Small's back, Jalen Wright, who was thinking about transferring, has come back as well, and then Dylan Sampson coming off of a fantastic true freshman year. The biggest question for the orange and white is that defensive side of the ball, and like you mentioned, Billy, secondary is kind of the biggest. It's been the biggest hole for the Volunteers for what feels like 10 years. And since Eric Berry left, it's been hard to kind of, have a dominant secondary. We had guys like Cam Sutton not too long ago, but the defense as a whole has been, secondary wise, has been kind of down. I know last year they want to tell you that, hey, look, stats, they didn't get killed that bad, but go watch the South Carolina film and watch that secondary get absolutely shredded. I mean, these are guys that are playing 15 yards off the ball and they can't defend a slant if the quarterback told them what was coming. So you have, and this is an exciting player that I'm pumped up about. Former Vanderbilt player Gabe Judy Lallis is coming in this season after transferring from BYU. Had a lot of great production at BYU. He seems so far in camp to be the number one corner. Warren Burrell got hurt last year against Pittsburgh, kind of slotting in as that two corner. But after that, Kamal Haddon didn't have a great year last year. Danico Slaughter has made the move over from safety to corner, so he's cornerback full time. He struggled last year. I'm kind of hoping the reps at cornerback kind of make him more comfortable. Christian Charles, who was a true sophomore last year, switched from safety to corner, and I think he's looking to be slotted into that corner position as well. But in terms of young guys, there's a freshman who's impressed. You will be very familiar with his name, Jordan Matthews, true freshman cornerback, has played very well so far in camp. Had a pick the other day in 7-on-7 drills. So the secondary is the hole, and I think if they can fix that secondary, I said I had a hot take yesterday. I think the hot take was Tennessee could have a top three defense in the SEC. It's there. You have the talent, you have the people. It's just coming together as one. That front seven is incredible. You have two big guys up front, and Amari Thomas and Elijah Simmons. Elijah Simmons changed his number to 51 to 10. Then you got Tyler Barron. Tyler Barron was kind of overshadowed last year by Byron Young, but he's had a great fall camp. Him and Simmons both have had a great fall camp, and the younger guys are actually pointing them out as the leaders so far of that defense. And that's what this team needs. This team needs leaders on both sides of the ball, but especially on defense, because the defensive line, we can argue, was one of the best in the SEC for the first half of that season last year. But you're only as good as your secondary is with how football has kind of transitioned more into a passing game. So there's a lot of questions, not as many as there have been, way less than what there have been. But there's a lot of pressure now riding on these Vols. I mean, this is not 6-6 expectations, 5-7 expectations. We're getting close to those SEC title talks. It's coming in the next few years the way if we continue the trend from last year. So these fall camps are going to get more intense and more hyped up. I would say going forward, just because I'm not going to say BACK yet because we're not there just yet. We had a great year last year, but you're kind of getting there, and with that comes a lot of outside talk and a lot of fall camp scrutiny. So it's going to be interesting. Young guys, Nico has looked great. He's missing guys in the corner, but hey, freshman, what do you want? What do you want from him? He's not going to come out there and be Tebow. So it's great. There's a lot of questions on defense. Offense kind of seems to be, the most sure fire position or side of the ball. with Josh Heupel, that's just how it's going to be going forward. The offense is going to be the offense. Now, what is your defense going to do? So
Well,
continue. Sorry.
yeah, I was just going to add to that. I disagree. I think Tennessee's back. I mean, I think after what they did last season, they're back at least on the map of being a consistent top 10 team because of what they did last year. Now, the there's a good and a bad, right? The good news for Tennessee fans is that okay, they might be back, right? They went 11-2. They won the Orange Bowl. Hendon Hooker had a phenomenal season. Probably should have been a Heisman. Should have made the trip up there. Um, right, all that good happened. But the bad, like you said, Chase, is that there's added pressure. Right, there really wasn't much pressure last season on Tennessee. I mean, they were coming off a 7-5 season, I think, where I think they had lost in that Music City Bowl, and people were kind of wondering what they were going to get last year, and all of a sudden they beat Florida, they beat Alabama, they kill LSU down there, and they roll on to an Orange Bowl victory. But at the end of the day, another season is going to come eventually, and you've got to keep that going. So, that's the good and the bad side. But I mean, you look at Josh Heupel and what he's done, and he's got a track record, right, of no matter who he has at quarterback, that offense is going to go, right? I mean, even with Hendon Hooker leaving, there's really no reason to expect much of a drop off. I mean, he's still got one of the best systems in the SEC. There's still going to be a matchup nightmare for every defensive coordinator. And like you said, Chase, that defense last year was underrated nationally, I think. I think the Georgia game was really the only game where I think they might have struggled a little bit with the physicality of Georgia. But I mean, you think back at that Clemson game, they were sending pressure. They were getting after Klubnik, and I think that's what they'll do against Virginia. I think they'll be able to do that against most teams. That defensive line, that's the biggest difference for me with this Tennessee team, how they look at defensive line. Obviously, there's questions at corner, but I mean, hell, every team has questions at corner. I mean, I feel like that's every team's weakness, right? Because of how the game has changed. Everybody's throwing the ball 40, 50 times a game now. So naturally, most defenses are going to struggle at that spot. But yeah, I mean, Tennessee, we're going to know what they get. I think you said you're going to know during the Virginia game. I think we'll really know. I think they're going to pummel Virginia and Austin Peay. I think we'll really know in Gainesville, week 3. Right, that's not an easy time to play Florida. Yeah, I think you'd probably rather get Florida a little bit later in the schedule. But getting them week 3 in Gainesville, that's okay. Let's go. Let's strap them up and let's play and see what Tennessee's got early in the season, right? And they've got UTSA sandwiched right between Florida and South Carolina, which I think is a sneaky game. So, we're going to know, I think, a little bit about what we get from Milton those first couple games. What we're really going to know, right? That's the first big test at Florida, right? And then I think South Carolina will be a test, A&M, and then Bama. But that Florida game, Chase, I think that's when we're really going to know, okay, how much has Joe Milton improved? Can he play under pressure? Can he perform in front of a road raucous environment? Florida's going to have a chip on their shoulder, try to beat Tennessee after last year. But yeah, I mean, you're right, Chase. You know better than me about kind of the depth of this roster. I agree with you. If they can figure something out at corner and in the back of that defense, this could be a playoff team, right? Because we know what we're getting on offense, right? I think a lot hinges still though on Joe Milton, and yeah, I think Joe Milton's as big of a question. Well, maybe not as big, but he hasn't done it consistently, right? So that's what you also have to find out with Tennessee, not just the cornerbacks, but can Joe Milton perform consistently? And we're going to see. We're going to see this year. This is the year for Joe Milton to shine because he could potentially be a first-round draft pick. But who knows? I mean, you never know what could happen. But at the end of the day, Chase, that offense is going to go. Can the defense hold up its end of the bargain? Because if they do, I think they could be a playoff team.
Yeah, if the defense can keep up, I said this last year, with that kind of offense, you don't need an Alabama, Georgia type of elite defense. You just need a great defense. It doesn't need to be elite and shutting everybody out. You just need them, if you can give up, average 20 points a game given up, your offense is going to put up 45, 50. So if they can just, not allow teams to kind of match the offense a little bit, they're going to be a dangerous team. And I feel like we'll preview the schedule kind of as we get closer to the season in a couple weeks. But I feel like this is the first Tennessee schedule that kind of builds up. It's not you don't have that death row kind of
Yeah.
gauntlet of a run. You have your, Florida third game of the season, like you said. What's Florida going to be this year? We don't really know yet. But you move the Georgia game kind of back to almost the last two games of the season, I want to say. The second to last game of the season. That's kind of nice. That alleviates some of that pressure. And now you're kind of building up to Georgia. That's what this season kind of feels like. That's what the schedule kind of feels like. Is we're building up to see what Georgia has and what we will do against them. The Bama game is a whole different, story and a whole different topic of conversation. But I feel like the schedule is a build up. It's going to get guys comfortable playing together and playing as a team. But yeah, the defense, that is the biggest question. And I think we will know the answer, like you said, by the time we get to Florida. Let's transition a little bit, continuing with our college football talk. We did this last time with some over unders. I'm going to quickly give you a recap of the last over unders that we did. Let me find them real quick. I know we talked about Missouri, Kentucky, Florida was also on there, and South Carolina. Me and Billy both on the under. Florida at 5.5. Kentucky was 6.5. Billy, you went under. I went over. South Carolina was 6.5. We both went over on that as well. Missouri, I think Missouri was 5.5, 6. You went under. I went over. So that's kind of where we are win total wise. We're gonna start with Arkansas. Arkansas, they have their win total set at, have it written down. I think it's 7. So Arkansas's win total is it 6.5 or 7? Do you have that in front of you, Billy? Is it 6.5 or
7.
is it 7? Okay, so it's at 7. So Billy, I'm gonna throw it over to you first. Over or under 7 for the Arkansas Razorbacks?
This is one of the easier ones. I'm going to go over. I like Arkansas this year. I love Sam Pittman. I mean, who doesn't? He's one of the more entertaining coaches in the SEC. I think they're going to have a bounce back season. That was a bad year last year for Arkansas. I mean, I know they got to a bowl game and ended up beating Kansas in the Liberty Bowl, but I mean, making the Liberty Bowl, I mean, that they've got a higher standard. So I think they'll bounce back. I think they've got one of the best quarterbacks in the conference with KJ Jefferson. I mean, the guy's massive. He looks like Cam Newton out there. I think he underperformed last year, but I think they like what they've got at the quarterback position and the offensive line to protect him. They're going to run the ball, right? I mean, they've got a lot of big dudes up front that they want to be physical and run the ball. He was Georgia's offensive line coach before he got the Arkansas job, so he's got that mindset. I think they'll be a great physical running team with Rocket Sanders. I mean, I think that's one of the best quarterback running back duos in the country, Jefferson and Sanders. But the thing with Arkansas, and it's kind of funny looking at their schedule, first 3 games should all be wins: Western Carolina, Kent State, and BYU. But the middle of that schedule is just an absolute gauntlet. At LSU, A&M in Dallas, which is a game they won last year, but it's never easy. At Ole Miss, at Alabama, and then Mississippi State at home. Then they get a bye. Then they got to go to Florida. I mean, that's a brutal middle of the schedule. And then they've got Auburn, FIU, and Missouri after that Florida game on the road. But you look at the middle of that schedule. If they can get through that, I mean, they're not getting through it unscathed. But I mean, if they can get through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 with 2, maybe 3 wins, I mean, they'll hit that over easily because they're going to beat those first 3 teams, and I think they'll win. I think they'll win their first 3 games and their last 3 games. If they can find a couple of wins in that gauntlet, I like them to go over their win total. But anyways, I think they're gonna reach 7 by winning their first 3 and then their last 4. It's just the middle of that schedule that's brutal. I don't have many high expectations for Florida, so I like them to beat Florida on the road this year. That gets them to 7 wins, I think. So this is one of the easier ones for me. I'm going to go over 7 wins for Arkansas.
I am going to back that as well. I think over. I don't think over by much. You can honestly even see a push at 7 even. Um, but yeah, I agree. I think you get to 8 wins. Like you said, the Millet schedule is tough. Outside of that, I mean, Mississippi State could give them a run for their money. I know, they're coming off of a very wild offseason, very wild end of the season after losing their head coach, Mike Leach, who sadly passed away. Like you said, you don't know what Florida is going to be. Auburn is another team that has a lot of question marks surrounding them. But I think they get to 8 wins, and I think they do it, rather comfortably. I think 8. I don't think you see them get to 9, but I'm hammering 8 absolutely. Um, so we both agree on that one. Time to go to a team that I just mentioned, Auburn. Their win total is set at 6.5, which was to me when I saw that was very surprising at 6.5.
Too low or too high?
I, I thought too high. I know they're coming off of a rather down
Yeah,
season. You bring in Hugh Freeze. I don't know if that was kind of your solidifying answer to that problem. I think it's too high. I think 6.5 is kind of reaching for Auburn.
put your mortgage on the under here. I'm not a fan of Auburn this year. I don't know if it's going to be a train wreck, but I don't think it's going to be pretty. I mean, you've got Robbie Ashford at quarterback, and they brought in Peyton Thorne from some Big Ten school. I mean, they don't have a quarterback, and I like Hugh Freeze a lot. I think he's one of the best coaches in the conference, but he doesn't have any pieces to work with right now. He's got a great running back, but I mean, what does he have at O line? I don't know really. There's just no proven commodities with me for Auburn. So I'm hammering the under there. They get an easy start to the schedule. I think they probably win their first three. UMass at Cal and then Samford. But I mean, another gauntlet in the middle of the schedule at A&M, Georgia at LSU, Ole Miss, Mississippi State at Vandy. I like Vandy in that matchup. I mean, it's kind of a weird trip to a stadium that's going to be under construction. Where is Auburn mentally late in the season? At Arkansas, they get, of course, Alabama at home, but I don't know. I mean, I think they could get to 6, but that's still under 6.5, right? So I don't see them getting over that. They could get close. Maybe they get to 7, but that feels like a reach to me. And I think they're at risk of missing another bowl game, which would not be a good start for Hugh Freeze. I think more likely than not they get to 6, but that's still under 6.5. So I'm gonna have to go under here, 6.5 for the Auburn Tigers.
Yeah, like I mentioned before, I thought that was a really high set over under. It's a tough side of the conference. I'm going under with
Mm-hmm.
you as well, and I think they miss a bowl game. I think they're not yet there yet. I don't think this is a trend that continues over the next 3 or 4 seasons, but I think this year,
Right, but next year, I think the next 2 3 years he'll get that. He'll get it right at Auburn.
yeah, I think give Hugh Freeze time to kind of get his hand in on their kind of
Yeah.
culture, and we'll see that moving forward. Switching gears real quick, continuing on, we have 3 teams left. A&M at 7.5. With the hype around A&M, 7.5 was wild to me. I thought Vegas would be a little bit higher on them. So Billy, over under 7.5.
It's a tough one. This is a really tough one for me. I want to say over, but I don't know, man. With Jimbo Fisher and A&M, I don't think they're trending in the right direction. And this is one of my hot takes this offseason. Jimbo Fisher isn't at A&M after this season. And I think now I don't know that I doubt that really happens. Um, I don't know. I just don't like last year was bad. I mean, that was really bad. And can they recover? Like how good really are these young guys that were freshmen last year that are back? And we saw all the guys that transferred out. I'm gonna go under, but not by much, right? I really, really want to go over, but it's hard to find 8 wins on that schedule. I mean, they have that road game at Miami. That's not going to be easy in week 2. They get Auburn at home, which is good. They should win that one. Arkansas and Dallas is always a toss up. Bama, Tennessee, South Carolina, and Ole Miss back to back to back to back. in the middle of the schedule. That's not easy. And then Mississippi State at home at LSU. I mean, their road games, that's got to be the toughest slate of road games in the country. At Miami, at Tennessee, at Ole Miss, and at LSU. I mean, good luck with that, Jimbo. I mean, they'll be better, but how much better? I just don't see 8 wins on that schedule. If the over under was 7, I would probably go over just because I think they probably get to 7. I don't know. It's hard for me to see 8 wins on that schedule. I want to go over, but I'm gonna have to go under. I don't think that program is trending in the right direction.
I'm going to follow you with the under. I think they get to 7, but I don't think they get to 8. And I think Jimbo Fisher is a clown, but whatever. So Ole Miss to kind of continue with our West talk. Ole Miss over under set at 7.5. Billy, how you think the Rebels go over or under with 7.5?
Over. I mean, I like Ole Miss. I like what Lane Kiffin's doing. I know last season ended in a disappointing fashion, but I think they've got one of the easier schedules in the conference. Their non-conference is Mercer, Tulane, which isn't a slouch, Georgia Tech, and UL Monroe. I mean, there should be 4 automatic wins right there. They got Auburn, of course, in the West, Arkansas, Bama, LSU, Mississippi State, and A&M. I mean, I like them against A&M. I like them against Arkansas. I think they match up well with those teams. Obviously, LSU is going to be tough. They draw Georgia and Vandy from the East. I mean, Georgia's that's going to be tough, but I mean, I think they'll beat Vandy, and then Mississippi State to end the season. I like them going over. Now, I not convincingly. I mean, this could be an 8 win season again, but I think they definitely get over 7.5.
I'm going to follow you with that, and I think you just said it. 8 wins is kind of what I have them at, barring an
And this
upset
is
or two.
regular season. This is regular season finish, right? Or are they're
Yes,
not
a
counting the
regular
bowl
season
game? Okay,
finish.
yeah,
Yeah, so this is
yeah.
regular season finish. I expect them to get to 8, possibly win the bowl game to get them to 9, but regular season over under, give me 7.5. I think it's pretty easy. I love Lane Kiffin. I'm probably the biggest Tennessee Lane Kiffin fan. I used to hate him as a kid, but now, I mean, I love the guy to death. Um, our final team of our over under talk for this week is a fun one. The LSU Tigers. Billy over under 9.5 for the very hyped up LSU Tigers.
Yes, very hyped up. I hate these hooks. By the way, I hate the 7.5, 9.5, 8.5. Because it makes you think, But this is our final one. I think it's the toughest one because yes, they're hyped up, but they've got some really, really tricky games. I mean, the first game of the year is against the top 10 team in the non-conference, Florida State. I mean, good luck with that. They lost it last year. I think they should beat Florida State, but that's a huge challenge to start the season. It gets a little bit easier. Grambling, Mississippi State, Arkansas. That Ole Miss game on the road is the game for me. I look at that one as the deal breaker here because if they beat Ole Miss, I think they're in a really good spot to get over 9.5 because then they got Mizzou, Auburn, Army, Florida, Georgia State. I think they'll win those games. A&M at home at the end of the season is another toss up for me. This is a tough one. I'm going to go over. I like Jaden Daniels. I think Brian Kelly is a winning head coach, and I mean all he does is win. I mean, what hell of a season last year for LSU. I think they keep it going. I don't know if they get to the playoff, but I'll go over. But that's not going to be an easy over to get for LSU.
I'm gonna back you with over, and actually my hot selling point for this coming year is LSU is gonna win the West. That is my hot take going in from the West side. I think Alabama. We talk about it. They're Alabama, yes, but we're starting to see that downtrend a little bit that we see in some of these dynasties. You're starting to see the uptick of the past dynasties from the LSU Tiger team. So yeah, that
Mm-hmm.
is my hot take for the year is that LSU is going to go on to win the West. So give me the over 9.5. Don't think they get past whoever, probably Georgia in the SEC title game. A Tennessee fan can hope, but I think LSU is going back again this year to another SEC title game. And they're going to be great. Jaden Daniels is coming off of a fantastic year, like you said, a great year all around for LSU. Uh, it seems like after that Tennessee stomping, they turned it around and kind of flipped it in their favor. Uh, but I think that is just going about. Man, English sometimes is hard, Billy. I don't know if you know that or not, but I think that is going to wrap it up for us this week. Next week, we are going to be previewing week 0, Vanderbilt and Hawaii. That will be our main talking point. I know Billy's excited. I'm excited. 2.5 weeks. Got cut off there a little bit, guys, but thank you guys so much for checking this out. If you've made it this far, uh, thank you so much. I hope you guys stick with us through this busy football season, and we have a lot of good ideas coming up through the pipeline, hopefully within the next 2 months. So stay tuned because this is just the beginning. So next week we'll talk more football. We'll start previewing week 0, Vanderbilt versus Hawaii. So stay tuned with us, and we will get you all of the news that you need. So thank you guys so much, and we'll catch you next week.